The glass was already poured when I came back to the table. I remember that detail clearly, the way the candlelight caught the red wine, the way my son-in-law was leaning back in his chair with that easy smile he always wore, like a man who had never worried about anything in his life. My daughter was touching up her lipstick. Neither of them saw me standing at the edge of the dining room, watching them for just a moment before they noticed I was there. That's the moment I keep returning to, not what happened after. That moment when everything still looked like a family dinner. My name is not important. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a structural engineer in Pittsburgh, raised one daughter with my wife Barbara, and buried Barbara 3 years ago last March, after she fought ovarian cancer for 14 months without a single complaint. We were married 40 years. I still drink my coffee from the mug she gave me on our 30th anniversary. I still check the other side of the bed in the morning before I remember. After Barbara passed, I sold the house in Shadyside. We bought it in 1987 for $112,000. When the real estate agent told me what it would list for in today's market, I sat in the car for a long time before I could drive home. The house sold in 9 days. I walked away with just over $840,000 after fees and capital gains. I moved into a smaller place in Sewickley near the river, quiet neighborhood, older neighbors, a grocery store I can walk to. My daughter, Celine, lives in Mount Lebanon with her husband Garrett. They have 2 kids, my grandchildren, Poppy and Miles, who are 8 and 5. I love those kids the way you love the people who remind you that life keeps going even when you think it won't. Garrett works in commercial real estate development. Or he did. That's the part of this story I'll get to. Celine and Garrett had been having dinner with me once a month, regular as clockwork, ever since Barbara died. I appreciated it. I'm not too proud to say that I was lonely in those first couple of years, and seeing my daughter's face across a table, watching Miles fall asleep on the drive home, hearing Poppy tell me about second grade with the complete seriousness of a prosecutor presenting a case. Those dinners kept me anchored. I lived for them. The dinner in question happened on a Friday night in October. Celine had chosen a restaurant in the South Side, a place called Ember and Oak that they liked, upscale but not stuffy, the kind of place where they know your name if you come twice. I had been there before with them. The host remembered Garrett by name. I arrived first. I always arrive first. Barbara used to tease me about it, said I'd be early to my own funeral. I sat at the table they'd reserved, ordered a sparkling water, and looked out the window at the street while I waited. It was a cool night. People were wearing jackets. A couple walked by holding hands, and I looked away. Celine and Garrett arrived about 12 minutes later. The kids were with Garrett's mother for the night. They were in high spirits. Garrett especially. He ordered a bottle of Malbec almost immediately, something he described as worth celebrating. When I asked what we were celebrating, he smiled and said, "You'll see, Walt. You'll see. I should tell you something about Garrett. He is the kind of man who fills a room, tall, broad-shouldered, quick with a joke, the type who remembers the names of servers and makes them feel like the most important person in the restaurant. Women have always liked him. Men want to be liked by him. I understood, from the first time Celine brought him home, why she had fallen for him. He had a quality I can only describe as forward momentum. He always seemed to be moving toward something, always had a plan, always knew where he was going. What I did not understand until much later was that a man who always appears to be moving toward something is sometimes actually running from something else entirely. I excused myself before the wine was poured. I had been dealing with a mild urinary infection that week. the unglamorous reality of being 67, and I wanted to use the restroom before the food arrived so I wouldn't have to interrupt the meal. I told them I'd be right back. The restrooms at Ember and Oak are in a hallway near the back of the kitchen. On my way back, I passed through a narrow corridor between the bar and the dining area. A woman was standing there, one of the servers, I thought. Though she wasn't wearing the restaurant's uniform, she was wearing a white dress shirt and black slacks, the kind of outfit a sommelier or a floor manager might wear. She looked to be in her mid-40s. She was watching something in the direction of my table. She noticed me and her expression changed. She hesitated for just a moment, the way people do when they're deciding whether something is their business. Then she stepped toward me and said quietly, "Excuse me, are you with the party at table 14? The older gentleman?" I told her I was. She glanced back toward the dining room, then looked at me directly. "I was filling the bread service at the table behind yours about 3 minutes ago. I don't want to alarm you, but I saw the man at your table, the tall one. I saw him put something into one of the wine glasses, the one on the left side of the table. I don't know what it was. It could be nothing. But I thought you should know." I stood there for a moment. I said, "Are you certain?" She said, "I wasn't certain enough to call the manager immediately, but I was certain enough to tell you." I thanked her. I asked for her name. She said it was Roberta. I walked back to the table. I want to be honest about what I felt in those 30 seconds between the hallway and the table. It was not panic. It was not even disbelief. It was something quieter and more terrible than both of those things. It was the sensation of a door opening onto a room you didn't know was in your house. Celine was looking at her phone. Garrett was cutting bread. The wine glasses were on the table, mine on the left side, closest to the window, where I'd been sitting. I sat down. I looked at my glass. I said, "You know what, Garrett? I changed my mind. Pour that for yourself. I think I'll have the Pinot Noir by the glass tonight. This Malbec's a little heavy for me on a weekday." He laughed and said it was Friday. I said, "You know what I mean." He said, "More for us then," and poured the glass into Celine's. I watched. Celine drank from it before the appetizers arrived, and I said nothing, because I did not know for certain, because there was still a part of me that was sure I had misunderstood, that Roberta had seen something innocent. Garrett dropping a Tums into his own glass, or adjusting an ice cube, or any one of 100 ordinary things that look strange at an angle. I told myself that. I held on to that. Then, about 40 minutes later, Celine said she felt unwell. She said it the way she used to when she was a little girl, quietly, apologetically, as if being sick was an inconvenience she was causing me. She said her head was pounding and she felt dizzy. She excused herself and went to the restroom. She was gone for 11 minutes. When she came back, she was pale. Garrett looked at her with what I can only describe as controlled concern. Not the sharp, instinctive alarm of someone watching the person they love suddenly fall ill. Something measured, something waiting. I said I thought we should get her home. He said, "Yes, of course, let me get the check." And I sat there at the table watching him signal for the server. And I understood the way you understand certain things not through logic, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small observations finally colliding. I understood that the glass had been meant for me. I drove home in a state I cannot fully explain. I made myself a cup of decaf. I sat at the kitchen table until 1 in the morning. I called my doctor's answering service and asked them, without giving too much detail, what a person should do if they believed someone had put something in their drink at a restaurant. The on-call nurse told me to contact the restaurant and, if I had any symptoms, to go to an emergency room immediately. She mentioned that many substances are water-soluble and would be difficult to detect after a period of time. I called Ember and Oak the next morning and asked to speak with the floor manager. I told him what Roberta told me. He took it seriously. He said he would review the camera footage and get back to me. He called me 2 hours later and confirmed that there was footage of Garrett leaning over the table and appearing to place something into a wine glass while I was away from the table. He had already spoken with Roberta directly. He was preparing to contact the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. What followed moved more quickly than I expected. The police contacted me that afternoon. A detective named Marsh, no relation to anyone I know, just a man in a grey sport coat who drank bad coffee from a paper cup and asked careful questions, came to my home on Saturday evening. I told him everything. He asked me whether I wanted to press charges. I told him I didn't know yet. He told me that it didn't entirely matter what I wanted, if the substance in the glass could be identified and linked to Garrett. The district attorney could pursue charges regardless of my wishes. What he needed from me was my cooperation. I cooperated. What they found, I learned later through the detective, was more than I had let myself suspect. Garrett's search history on his work laptop, which was not his personal property, and which his employer provided full access to investigators under their own cooperation agreement, included searches for sedatives, for the effects of benzodiazepines combined with alcohol, for how long certain substances remained detectable in the bloodstream. These searches had been conducted over a period of 3 weeks. They also found his financial records. Garrett's commercial real estate firm had been hemorrhaging money for almost 2 years. He had made a series of leveraged investments in mixed-use development projects in the Mon Valley that had collapsed when a major anchor tenant pulled out of 3 contracts simultaneously. He had covered the losses for months by drawing down a line of business credit without Celine's knowledge. When that was exhausted, he had taken a second mortgage on their home, also without her knowledge, which is a separate legal matter entirely. By the time of that October dinner, he owed approximately $430,000 to various creditors, including 2 that his attorney later described in court as non-traditional lenders. Those were the ones I worried about most, the kind of people who do not send politely worded letters. He knew about the house sale. He had been there when I mentioned it, months earlier, over a perfectly ordinary Sunday dinner. He knew the number. $840,000. He knew that it was sitting in a money market account at PNC, while I figured out what to do with it long term. He knew I had no other children, no siblings still living, and that my will, drafted years ago, left almost everything to Celine. He had not told Celine about the debts. That, I believe, was the piece that broke her. Not the attempt itself, though God knows that broke her too, but the fact that he had built a second life inside their marriage, a financial shadow life of debt and desperation, and had hidden it from her completely while sitting across from her at breakfast and coaching their son's pee-wee soccer team and telling her everything was fine. She called me from their house the night the police came to speak with him. She was crying in a way I hadn't heard since Barbara's funeral. She said, "Daddy, I didn't know. Please believe me, I didn't know. Please believe me, I didn't know." I told her I believed her. And I did. I do. That was the hardest part of this whole story to hold, not the betrayal itself, which had a villain with a face I could name, but the grief of watching my daughter realize that the man she'd chosen, the father of her children, the person she trusted with her daily life, had looked at her aging father and calculated a number. Garrett was charged with attempted poisoning and financial fraud. His attorney negotiated. The DA pushed back. After 8 months of legal proceedings that I attended in full, sitting in a courtroom on the 4th floor of the Allegheny County Courthouse with my hands folded in my lap, Garrett was convicted on both counts. He was sentenced to 6 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 4. His attorney made arguments about his character, his role as a father, his community involvement. The judge listened to all of it and then read the sentence from a paper in her hand as if she were reading the weather forecast. Celine filed for divorce while the trial was still ongoing. She moved back into her childhood home, my smaller place in Sewickley, which suddenly didn't feel so small. She and the kids have been there for 7 months now. Poppy started a new school. Miles has been sleeping in the room that used to be Celine's, the one with the window seat where Barbara used to read to her on Sunday mornings. Some nights I can hear one of them moving around upstairs getting a glass of water, and I lie there in the dark and I feel the strangest thing, grateful, in spite of everything, that the house is full again. I did 2 things in the weeks after the sentencing that I want to tell you about. The first was that I went back to Ember and Oak. I asked to speak with the floor manager and I asked him to bring Roberta. He told me she had moved on to another position, but he had her contact information and would reach out. 2 days later, she called me. We met at a coffee shop near her apartment in Lawrenceville. I brought an envelope. Inside was a check for $15,000 and a letter I'd written by hand, which said something to the effect of, "You did not have to say anything. You could have told yourself it wasn't your business. You could have walked back to the kitchen and convinced yourself you'd seen nothing. The fact that you didn't, the fact that you stood in that hallway and decided a stranger's safety was your concern, is the reason I am sitting here writing this letter to you. Thank you." She cried a little. She said she'd almost talked herself out of it. She said she'd stood in that hallway for a full minute trying to decide. I told her that 1 minute was worth more than she knew. The second thing I did was update my estate documents. I worked with my attorney to establish a trust for Poppy and Miles, funds that will be accessible to them when they turn 25, structured in a way that bypasses any future claims by spouses or creditors. Celine has her own portion, held separately. The accounts are managed now by a financial advisor at a firm on 5th Avenue, a woman named, well, I'll keep her out of this. She's good at her job. She doesn't need to be part of this story. What I want to say at the end of all this is something I've been trying to work out how to say since that October night when I sat at my kitchen table until 1 in the morning. I spent 31 years as an engineer. My entire professional life was built around understanding how structures bear weight, how load distributes through a system, where the stress concentrates, what fails first. I used to believe that families worked differently than buildings, that love was not load-bearing in the same way, that it didn't fail the same way. I know better now. But here's the other thing. I know Roberta stood in a hallway for a full minute and decided it was her business. My daughter called me from a house that was falling apart and asked me to believe her. Poppy told me last week, with complete seriousness, that she was going to be a paleontologist or possibly a judge, and she hadn't decided yet. Miles drew a picture of me and Barbara. I'm not sure how he knows what Barbara looked like, but children absorb things you don't expect, and he put it on the refrigerator without saying anything. The structures that hold, the ones that actually bear weight, are not always the ones you designed. Sometimes they're the ones that form around you while you are busy watching something else. I still check the other side of the bed in the morning, but it doesn't break me the same way anymore. Most mornings I get up, I make the coffee, and I can hear someone moving around upstairs, and that's enough. That's what I've got, and for now, that's enough. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since that October night. Not in any grand philosophical way. I'm an engineer, not a poet, but in the practical, structural sense that defined most of my working life. Every action distributes its weight somewhere. Every choice transfers load. That's not a metaphor. That's just how things work. Garrett made a series of choices. He borrowed money he couldn't repay. He hid it from my daughter. He sat across from me at dinner tables for years, laughing at my jokes and cutting my grandchildren's food, while carrying a version of his life he decided I didn't need to know about. And when the weight of that hidden life became more than he could hold alone, he looks at me, a 67-year-old man who'd just sold his family home, and made the calculation that I was the solution. That's the part I come back to. Not the anger, which faded faster than I expected, but the calculation. The fact that he looked at me and saw a number. I think about Roberta standing in that hallway for a full minute, deciding she had every reason to walk back to the kitchen. It wasn't her table. It wasn't her family. She had orders to run and a floor to manage and a dozen easier choices available to her. The fact that she didn't take any of them, the fact that she stood there and decided that a stranger's safety was worth the discomfort of speaking up, tells me something I find genuinely useful about how character works. It isn't announced. It doesn't show up on the days when it's easy. It shows up in a hallway in a quiet moment when nobody is watching, and the easier path is right there. That's what I want Poppy and Miles to understand someday, when they're old enough to hear this story. Not that the world is full of people like Garrett, though it has its share, but that the world also has Robertas in it. People who pause. People who decide that doing the right thing is worth the minute it costs them. That kind of character doesn't come from talent or luck or circumstance. It comes from practicing small acts of honesty until they become the only reflex you have. Celine has been rebuilding. It's slow and it isn't linear. Some weeks she's steady. Some weeks I hear her crying after the kids are asleep, and I make tea and sit with her at the kitchen table, and we don't always talk. That's all right. There is a kind of resilience that doesn't look like strength from the outside. It looks like getting up and making school lunches and answering your children's questions honestly and choosing every single day not to let what was done to you define what you become. She's doing that. I'm proud of her in a way I don't have the words for. I think the most honest thing I can say at the end of all this is that the worst thing that nearly happened to me also showed me exactly who the people around me were. Garrett showed me what he was. Roberta showed me what she was. Celine showed me, in the months that followed, a kind of quiet courage I didn't know she had. And my grandchildren. Poppy with her future career as a paleontologist/judge. Miles with his inexplicable drawing of Barbara on the refrigerator. They showed me that the point of surviving hard things is what comes after. The ordinary Tuesday mornings, the sound of someone moving around upstairs, a man who plans in secret, who builds his life on what he's hidden from the people who love him, eventually runs out of places to put the weight. That's not fate, that's not punishment from some unseen hand, that's just structure. That's just how load-bearing systems fail when the wrong person is holding something they were never strong enough to carry. I'm still here. The house is full. That's enough.